Section 7-8, which is the last one in the chapter. We're going to learn to factor by grouping as well as factoring completely, which should be pretty easy for you guys since you all know how to factor very well at this point. Okay, so this is example 1. I'm on page 404 in your textbook if you want to follow along. First thing you want to do is look at your signs. If the signs are all addition, then that's great. You can get started. It's a lot easier of a problem. So the first two examples are all addition. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to group the first two, and then you're going to want to group the second two terms. So let's group these together by putting parentheses. And now you're going to go back to the very beginning of your factoring, which is greatest common factor. So what is the greatest common factor here? That is x squared, and what's left is x plus 3, plus what is the greatest common factor here, which is 2, and what's left is x plus 3. Now what you notice is x plus 3, this binomial, those are the same. That's what your goal is. So now that those two are the same, that binomial, you can now factor that binomial out. So I'm going to write x plus 3 here, and you're going to multiply it by the binomial that's left, or whatever's left, which is x squared, right here, plus 2. Now before I box it, I want to make sure that I'm done factoring. This is two terms, but I know that neither of these are a difference of two squares because 2 is not a square. So there's my answer. Okay, let's move on to this one. They are all plus signs, so that's great. And I do want to start grouping it, but if you look at it, if I group these two terms together, they don't have a common factor. So what I'll have to do here is I'm probably going to have to move it around. So let me move it around. X squared, I'll move these two, plus x, plus y, because I moved these two, plus xy. All right, now let's see if I can group this. Common factor here is x. What's left is x plus 1. Common factor here is y. What's left is 1 plus x. And I know because of commutative property, I can move that around. So I'm now going to factor out the common binomial here, which is x plus 1. And I'm going to write down what's left, which is x plus y. Great. So I want you to pause your video right now to save some time for my video. I want you to try monitoring progress 1 and monitoring progress 2, and then I want you to come back and check your work. Tried it, and I know that monitoring progress 1 might have caused you some problems because when you were grouping a and 3, a plus 3, you realized, oh, they don't have a common factor other than 1. So here we're going to take out the 1. I want to point that out because we wanted this to be a plus 3 and a plus 3. Factor that out, and there's the answer. And for number 2, we had to move it around. Hopefully you did, and there's the answer. All right, so moving on, we are going to factor problems completely. Let's start with example 2a. All right, so start with the very first steps, greatest common factor. So what is the greatest common factor of all of these? You're going to notice it is going to be 3x. So I divide 3x out from this first term, and I get x squared plus 2x minus 6. Okay, and before I box it, I want to look at these, and I want this trinomial, and I want to see, can I factor this? Is it a perfect square trinomial? No, because 6 is not a square. Let's see. What two numbers multiply to negative 6 and then add to 2? Well, factors of 6 are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3, and that would not add up to 2, so this is going to be our final answer. You've got to make sure that you go through all of those steps that I talked about. I'll write them here. Greatest common factor is the first thing. Second one is 2 terms, 3 terms, and today we just learned about 4 terms. If it's 2 terms, it could be a difference of 2 squares. If it's 3 terms, it can be a perfect square trinomial, or it could be a regular trinomial, or what we call a diamond problem. And then with 4 or more terms, we are going to group it. Okay, let's move on to 2b. Greatest common factor, first step here, is going to be 7x squared. Factor that out, becomes x squared minus 4. Great. So we look at this one, and we're like, oh, I recognize this as a difference of 2 squares. So 7x squared, double bubble, x plus 4, oops, I'm sorry, x plus 2, and x minus 2. Now, are these two, could these be a difference of two squares, this one? No, it cannot, because 2 is not a perfect square, and there is your final answer. Okay, so moving on, we're going to finish this by solving an equation by factoring completely. All right, first thing we have to do is make this equal 0. So we're going to kick over the 10x, sorry, subtract 10x from both sides. 2x cubed plus 8x squared minus 10x equals 0. Factor out the greatest common factor, remember, very first step, don't forget that, and that's going to be 2x. What's left is going to be x squared, plus 4x minus 5. And that's going to equal 0. Now let's see if we can factor this one. I bet you we can. What two numbers multiply to -5 but add to 4? Well, by looking at my signs, I know it's going to be a plus minus. My factors are going to be 1 and 5, and since 4 is positive, the 5 is going to go here, and that's going to equal 0. Now, take a look at the degree here. This is 3. So that means there's going to be 3 roots for this problem. So the first root, we're going to split this one up into 3 equations. 2x is going to equal 0. X plus 5 is equal 0. X minus 1 is going to also equal 0. We solve this one. Your first root is going to be 0. Your second one is going to be -5. And your last one is going to be +1. So I want you to pause the video right now, and I want you to do monitoring progress 3 through 8. Check your answers in the back of the book, and then get on to your homework and classwork.